Yesterday we had a lot of drama in the scene. Happy got banned on War3Champions for leaving games against certain opponents very early. That was a one-day timeout. Now he's back on the ladder. So of course the big question is, did it work? And for that, it's relatively simple to check this. We go into War3Champions, we look at the match history, and we see no early leaves anymore. He's playing against Blade, he's playing against X-Lord, he's playing against Starbug, all regular matches from what I can tell. So the one-day timeout certainly worked. So that is already a little bit of a success. I would say no power tug of war, I guess. But man, did this spike a lot of comments with you guys. Shout out to Happy, by the way, for doing the right thing and listening to the rules and applying to the rules. So first of all, I read pretty much every single comment. And first I want to mention that a lot of you guys were thinking in extremes. For example, an argument oftentimes was against these temporary bans, timeouts, whatever you want to call it. So that means that every game you ever play has to be 100% and no flaws in the game could lead to an early leave and you should be banned for every early leave? Of course not. There's always something that can happen. You lose your engine of war to the creeps. You tap out early. It happens. You queue, you find a match, something comes up, you gotta leave real quick. Happens. This system, this rule, is not about every single game where we have an early leaver. This is about people who abuse this and who do this all the time and whose behavior is affecting the ladder integrity. So if you do it 4 times, if you leave early 4 times in 100 games, like, yeah, stuff happens, right? But if you do it in like 1/3 of your games, and you do it not randomly, but you award certain players, and you do not award other players, then that's a problem. And I hope you understand that there's a big, big, big difference. So I gathered questions, and I will answer them to the best of my knowledge. I will answer, or I will discuss all your suggestions, and I will hopefully clear up some misconceptions as well that a lot of you guys seem to have when it comes to the War3Champions ladder and some of your suggestions, of course. So, Word document, here we go. The big one, the big misconception is, and it's been a talking point for the majority of the Warcraft scene, ping. I don't know why this number was spammed so much. Apparently, a lot of people think that players have to play on 200 MS. It was all over the comment section. And I gotta tell you guys, Warcraft 3 2024, due to War3Champions, nobody has to play on 200 MS, really. There are always a couple of exceptions to the rules, but if we're generally speaking, then nobody is playing on 200 MS. I want to stick with the Happy example real quick, because the last video was about Happy. So, I made a map to display what this is really about. So, Happy is obviously playing tournaments. You know that. And these tournaments are oftentimes played on China North. China North for Happy is like 92 MS. That's the baseline, 92 MS. Then for Happy, or as a player in Moscow, you can basically, due to the rules of War3Champions, get roundabout a maximum ping of 125. The one limit to the western side would be a New York server with, what is it? 110 ms. The other extreme, far in the east, would be a server in I forgot the name. Sorry. Khabarovsk. In Khabarovsk with 105 ms. So we're not talking like doubling your lag, but we're talking about a difference of 10 to 15 ms compared to tournament games. When the max ping is, generally speaking, round about 125 ms. This is not extreme. A comparison, prior to War3Champions, a lot of the good players were playing on NetEase. That was a Chinese server. Everybody had to play on the Chinese server. It doesn't matter if you're from China or Korea or Russia or Germany. So that means you oftentimes had to play ladder and tournaments on like 150 to 180 ms. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on your routing, ping accelerator, etc. But whatever, even if you take the lowest value, you're still higher on the NetEase server than you are on the maximum ping of the system that's in place at War3Champions right now. And if you go even further back to the old Battle.net, we had a 200 ms built in for everyone there. 200. So we are, as you say, the green line is Happy's connection to CN North, 92 ms. And what he refuses to play is New York with 110 and the Russia East server with 105. That's what we're talking about here. So, still, ping was a big discussion for a lot of you guys. And it's kind of understandable. A lot of you said people should be able to veto servers, or you should introduce a setting that makes you set your personal ping maximum. I explained already, War3Champions is a global ladder in the Warcraft scene. We have a limited player base. We need this global scene, global ladder, to get as many people as possible on the ladder. For that to work, sometimes you have to accept higher ping. And why is that? It's another example. This time it's an example of Leon and Lin. This is Central Europe versus China. These two regions are connected by pretty much one single server that is able to connect both regions on playable ping. And that is a server in somewhat the middle of central Russia. That server has like 115 ms for both, a little more maybe, round about 115. So if Leon and Lin now set their personal preference to at max 100, they would never meet. And of course, these players are an example for an entire region. If the European people set their max to 100 and the Chinese people set their max to 100, you would never get matches of Europe versus China, or Korea for that matter. It's the entire Asia room. So then, if these regions never meet, you won't get any games. So this has to be accepted. This is a fundamental rule that has to be in place to have the global ladder work. There is no other choice. If you disconnect regions from matching with each other, sometimes, you know, that has to work. For example, Northwest Canada would probably not meet with Australia. I'm not too sure. There are regions that have a higher ping tolerance. For example, the ping tolerance in South America is higher than the one in Russia. So they have to play at 200 sometimes, but they also were asking for this to get more games, to be more connected with the rest of the world. They wanted this higher ping in favor of faster matches and better matchmaking. So that is why we, with our player base, I know this thing exists in like Dota, but with our player base, we cannot have server vetoes. It just doesn't work. It's impossible. This is a thing that works in a dream, in a perfect scenario. You could think about it. In reality, impossible. So this is why we cannot have server vetoes. Then the next question. Oh, wait, I had another one. Like this one right here is another example, right? If Hitman is then a little more picky about the ping as he used to be, and he sets his maximum to 80, then this would also disconnect US West from Europe because you wouldn't even be able to match on New York anymore. You see the problem? If you're super picky, then you disconnect from a region. This is not made up by people who set the slider higher, and then you ruin the global ladder. So this is basically the reason for that. So another suggestion. Why are you getting punished for leaving early at all? Just don't count the games. I have some example comments here, but those are the comments that I got a lot. Just don't punish for early leaving. Well, I know this is done in chess. As the comment suggests, in online chess, if you leave a game before the second move, no player gets MMR. Why can't they do something for War3Champions? Well, if that would be the case, players exploit everything all the time whenever they can. If you put this rule in place, then people would leave if they're up against Happy because Happy's so good. They would leave because they don't like the opponent. They would leave because they don't like the matchup. They don't like the map. Maybe they don't like the starting position. For some matches, there's two possible servers. One that favors the other, the one a bit, for example, Europe versus North America. You could play on US East or you can play on EU North. And basically there's a 50-50 rule between it. So half the games are played on US East, half the games on EU North. But the European players could then leave every game that's on US East, and the American players could leave every game that's on EU North. It doesn't work that way. People would do that. 100% they would do that. So this is why this is not an easy solution. You cannot do this. And then we'd never have any games, basically. What if the leaver gets punished, but the winner doesn't get rewarded with MMR? I was asking around about this, and the reason for this is that it would lead to MMR deflation. As I said, I didn't really explain it. I said it in the previous video. MMR is a closed system. If you disregard new players, in an existing player base, the number of MMR is always the same. After a match, the winner gets MMR, takes it from the loser who's losing MMR, but the overall MMR stays the same. So now, you only take MMR away from the loser, but you don't give it to the winner. That would lead to MMR deflation because you take it out of the system. What does this lead to? Extend this to infinity. Do it over and over and over and over again. Many games, many seasons. All players, regarding if they leave or not, will get lower values. And if you spin this even further, people will end up with negative MMR. That's obviously a problem. It's an extreme case, but this is the direction that it leads to. There are solutions. you could put a band-aid on it. But to fix this, it would get increasingly more complex. And complex things usually lead to more problems, right? So if you implement the system to fix something that you could maybe fix with like a warning and a 1-day ban over time, you save yourself from a rat's tail, from that avalanche of complexity. So this is why this is also not a perfect system and it's not a perfect solution. Some people argued, if Happy donates MMR to Xlord, it doesn't really matter because the game that Xlord then loses to, let's say, Colorful, it will even out over time. Because if you have higher MMR, you automatically lose more MMR in a regular game. Well, partly true, but it doesn't really even out. A win against Happy, because this is now an isolated case with mostly only Happy. His MMR is so high because he's so good that if Happy continues to hand out these wins, it won't be even, and the win that you get from Happy is always worth more than like 1 or 2 regular losses. So if you're a player that Happy is dropping matches against, you're automatically in a better situation than if Happy plays regularly against you, because then you will continue to lose MMR. And that's just unfair. That is just unfair, and that is why Happy is such an extreme case. But of course, it is a problem that goes down if you always give MMR to the same opponent, but you don't give MMR to other opponents, it's simply unfair. I want to skip 6 for now and go to another thing here. Just time the levers out and punish them with a timeout. For example, Franz says, just display a message, warning player XYZ, you're aborting too many games and this will result in a temporary ban. Turns out there is a timeout system on the server. And that was due to join bugs in place and because people were losing many games at the beginning of a new account. And they were tanking their MMR, and this timeout rule is protecting lower MMR players so that fresh accounts can't tank their MMR that way. This is, of course, also an automated solution. You put in this timeout system, like let's just come up with some numbers. If there's 5 games shorter than 3 minutes, give the warning to the player. Well, you know what happens? We've seen exactly this behavior. Players will stay for 3 minutes and 1 second. And then what do? You raise the bar, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Well, then the player stays for 3 minutes and 31 seconds. This has happened. And it became more and more popular. That's one of the reasons why Happy wasn't leaving immediately anymore, but throwing these games away with ghoul rushes. Exactly that. So an automated system with timeouts will, unfortunately, the people will try to exploit it and abuse it. Problem. So that's the situation here. It's not that easy. It would be great to have an automated solution. It's not that easy. Then something that people said, just have a blacklist. So players can put other players that they don't want to match on the blacklist. So this can be easily exploited, especially on the top ladder. Like, you put Happy on the list, you never meet him anymore. You put the best players of your weakest matchup on the list, you don't meet them anymore. People will, again, they will exploit it. You try to help the players and they use it to their advantage. I do the same, of course, but yeah, that's just how it is. And then again, if you don't meet happy 20 times a week, you won't lose that MMR. That puts you higher on. And of course, happy would then get no games. Whatever. It is what it is. Obviously, it would be great to never be forced to play against players who, for example, threatened you. These players can, should, and in my opinion, must be reported. So hopefully we weed out these bad apples and have them banned for good, because it ruins the experience for a lot of players. Here comes an argument then. Whenever I say we need stricter moderation, they said, oh, player base is so small already, you can't ban everyone. I say, yeah, but how many people are driven away by these bad apples? By these people who insult you, who threaten you? You got to protect these people. These new people that were otherwise be driven away. There are options on the server. You can check a box and then you don't meet the same opponent within the next 8 hours. That is on the top level, unfortunately, not that realistic. You can also mute the opponent, so at least there's no interaction between you anymore in terms of in-game chat. And there's also a draw option. If both players agree to a draw, that game will not count. That is in place. But then you queue again and you oftentimes match into each other. So there's like a gentleman's agreement who lets the other guy go first. It's not perfect, but it is a solution. So now I want to go back to, it's not the player's fault that the system is flawed. That's an odd thing. The system is flawed, can't force a person to play in conditions that bring you stress or frustration. This is not a player problem. Say what you want, but it's a game at the end of the day. So, nobody's forced to play on War3Champions. If you're not fine with a ping of like 100, if that is your number one priority above anything else, you can play on Battle.net. You can play on Game Ranger. You can play on Euro Battle, whatever it's called. If that's your number one priority, you can do that. It's not great though. If you want regional matchmaking, feel free to play on Battle.net. Then of course you're missing out on a lot of stuff. You are missing out on top level competition. You are also missing out on fair servers, because all the other systems don't have 28 servers around the world. If you play, let's say you play Europe versus Russia on Battle.net. The server is in Amsterdam or Frankfurt, always. There's no two servers back and forth that evens it out. No, you're going to be playing on European Central. In America, it's crazier. There's an America server who is in California. So you're playing US West versus US East, and you always play on the server US West, where the US West person has a 5 MS, and the person from New York has to play on like 80 or 90. That is flawed. War3Champions, whether you like the people in charge or whether you like the decisions or not, War3Champions is better than Battle.net ever was. War3Champions is better than NetEase ever was. These playing conditions that we got for the players are by a landslide the best playing conditions any Warcraft generation has ever had in any region ever. Plus, they have the highest level of competition on top, which, of course, goes hand in hand. So it's a player's choice what their priority is. When it comes to ping, there is physical limitations, obviously. You can't have Korea versus US East on 5MS. It is physically not possible. So if you want the high ladder competition, and that is what W3Champions stands for, and the global experience that W3Champions stands for, that's a trade-off. So they say that the system is flawed. People like Angel Cubero 1883. The system is flawed. But the system is built in the most general way possible. There's thousands of players among thousands of games. There's no workforce in the world that can observe every single case. It has to work for the majority. You gotta generalize rules. You can't do every case by case by case by case. So these rules are intertwined with the system. The rules have to be followed so the system works. And the system works because these rules are getting followed. So if the players are not playing by the rules and they bend the rules, that creates exceptions in the system that leads to a flawed system. If everybody is behaving perfectly, like they should, the system isn't flawed. You see the problem? It's a little bit of a hen and egg thing. But not really. Because it's the players who cause the problems by not following the rules. So this is also, like, in no competitive environment, sandbagging is allowed. It's not allowed in chess. It's not allowed in fighting games. It just isn't. For this to work, you cannot give out free wins because then the system is flawed. So that was my little explanation about the "it's so easy, here's the solution" comments that I've seen in hundreds of you guys. And I hope you see now why it's not that easy, why it just can't be changed from here on out. You also see that people thought about this already and discussed things already. Some things can't be implemented because of the player base is so low. Some things can't be done because there's physical limitations. Some things are just misconcepted in the general mind. And again, I have to say this. W3Champions, there are flaws, obviously. Nobody is perfect. But it is by far the best playing conditions for the entire world ever. And we should appreciate that and give feedback in a constructive and reasonable way to make it, if it's possible, make it even better, instead of jumping on them and criticize them so hard and act like these guys don't know what they're talking about. Because they clearly know what they're talking about and they clearly know what they're doing. Sometimes their hands are tied. Sometimes they have good reason not to follow leads like, or your ideas like server vetoes, like blacklists, etc., etc., etc. Hope this became a little bit more clear. Hope this educated some people a little bit. Hope this was useful. Hopefully players are following the rules and are not getting banned and timeouted, even though it was a very well-clicked video that made me maybe $5. Whatever it is. Let's continue a constructive conversation about this that hopefully leads to improvements for anyone. And maybe some of you are even more genius than the people behind W3Champions, and you do have the solution, and I find it in the comment section, and then I forward it to the team, or they read it, because they are, of course, Vivid followers here, and then we make it even better. That would be perfect. Thank you very much. If you guys have ideas, or if you guys have comments, or if I got something wrong because I'm not a techie, post it in the comments. Would be great. See you then.